Police! What are you looking for? You're making a big mistake. He's only a kid.
Dad, I haven't done anything.
Misogyny, knife crime, toxic masculinity, cyberbullying, just some of the issues that have been raised by a Netflix drama series called Adolescence.
He's a good kid. Jamie, I want you to listen carefully.
It's interesting how such issues get highlighted once again across the entire mainstream media, miraculously, and even politicians get in on the act with Parliament now discussing all the major issues that were raised by essentially a fictional piece of drama.
You use the term problematizing. I'd say pathologizing masculinity. That's how far I'd go in terms of what we see in the mainstream generally. And in terms of Adolescent as a program, as a TV drama, I had my concerns. As a piece of art, brilliant, well made, the actors really executed well. But if we as a society are to take a serious message from that, then I would find that disturbing, because it had very little to do with the so-called manosphere and very little to do with the red pill, and it flirted with the idea of the incel. It teased a little bit with a few buzzwords, but there was no real deep dive, if I can use the phrase, into that world.
I guess really doing more of what's been happening steadily in Western society, particularly, which is the atomization of family.
Yes.
The atomization of community, getting people to be divided, creating fear, creating a kind of a demoralization, a mistrust between gender.
If you go back to the BBC series Spooks, it put out a lot of plot lines involving Muslims with backpacks. And the next thing that happens is we have 7/7, and so the narrative was already planted in people's brains. So this idea of predictive programming goes back decades.
The outcomes with the violence, with the antisocial behavior, with the imprisonment, with the addiction, with the suicide rates, it's avoidable.
What would be your advice to them?
I would say to them to remember that you matter, that you're important just because you are you, that there is help available if you're struggling. Speak to somebody, tap into an elder, a relative, a family member that you trust. It will get better, things will get better. But I believe in you and I love you.
Hello and welcome to this edition of the Deep Dive Perspective. Misogyny, knife crime, toxic masculinity, cyberbullying, just some of the issues that have been raised by a Netflix drama series called Adolescence. It's interesting how such issues get highlighted once again across the entire mainstream media, miraculously, and even politicians get in on the act with Parliament now discussing all the major issues that were raised by essentially a fictional piece of drama about fictional characters, and it's all being taken terribly seriously, to the point where even schools in Britain are going to be asked to let their kids watch this. To what extent is media leading narratives, and to what extent is the media colluding with political narratives which are very useful for governments? This is a question that we're going to ask today, and I've got with me in the studio psychotherapist Bilal Ali, who is also a rites of passage facilitator for young disaffected boys, as well as online we have Clive Menzies, who's the founder of outersight.org and is very concerned about the big issues that underlie most of the news and most of the political agendas that we see rolled out across mainstream media and beyond. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Welcome, Bilal, and welcome, Clive.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
And do please like, share, and subscribe to the channel, so that we can get ourselves to a lot more people who need to ask the kind of critical questions and apply the critical thinking that we're encouraging within what we feel is a genuine, independent way of looking at what's going on in the world around us. Very, very important these days. But I'm going to kick off with you, Bilal. Mm-hmm. This is your bread and butter. You deal with young, disaffected boys, adolescents, men.
Indeed.
Long before this Netflix movie's come out. And of course, issues like the Red Pill Manosphere, the social media networks, the online, issues that are all now becoming major factors in the way young people grow up and how they are influenced. This is a massive area. It's almost a battleground. And it does seem as though boys and men are coming off the worst on this. There seems to be a constant problematizing of boys and men. Is it justified? And give me the overview of your thoughts around the kind of thing adolescence has raised.
You use the term problematizing. I'd say pathologizing masculinity. That's how far I'd go in terms of what we see in the mainstream generally, and in terms of Adolescent as a program, as a TV drama. I had my concerns. As a piece of art, brilliant, well made, the actors really executed well. So as a piece of art, a piece of fiction, it's very cool, entertaining. But if we as a society are to take a serious message from that, then I would find that disturbing, because it had very little to do with the so-called manosphere and very little to do with the red pill, and it flirted with the idea of the incel. It teased a little bit with a few buzzwords, but there was no real deep dive, if I could use the phrase, into that world. It just alluded to, but more than anything else, masculinity was only or often framed as the problem, as dangerous, as unbridled, and if it's not curtailed, then we have a problem. It's then by default toxic, and that doesn't really sit well with me. That doesn't really sit well with me at all.
Well, I think it's probably good that we define some of these terms, because many people won't be familiar with the Red Pill Manosphere. They won't be familiar with these kinds of issues of toxic masculinity. Tell me a little bit about that terminology and what it actually means.
Yeah. So, for example, Red Pill is the analogy from the film The Matrix, which goes way back to 1999, and the idea of if you take the red pill, your eyes will be open to certain truths. Maybe uncomfortable truths, but you'll be, enlightened. And if you take the blue pill, you go back into the delusion, into, just living in the system. And so there was this idea that these guys have used this metaphor, created a space. Sometimes it was online blogs before even YouTube really took off, but there have been many red pill ideas. I guess you could call them, in another sense, it's almost a form of masculinism, right? Or being masculinist, in the sense of young women had deficits in society, and many of the issues that concerned women and girls weren't being addressed, and there was systemic injustices or inequalities, and there was a whole ideology evolved to really address that. And so I think if you really boil it down, boys and young men and adolescent boys have this deficit, and so this thing is kind of emerged to speak to men's issues. Sometimes not in the most, let's say, in the most balanced and reasonable way. There is elements of anger. There's anger in it of itself isn't a bad thing. Frustration, things of that nature. And so people have been sharing ideas, but they're not mainstream ideas. The problem is that to be in the mainstream, it needs to be watered down and acceptable. And so this is why the boys have enough of that watered down, acceptable stuff, good feminist man stuff. It doesn't really hit the spot. So they're looking for answers, and then they end up in these spaces. But
Andrew Tate, it comes to mind as probably the poster boy for this kind of red pill manosphere. And some of his obviously his dialogues or diatribes or posts or videos that you see, I mean, they are pretty low end kind of intellectually limited kind of analysis of what men are or aren't. But they're having a massive effect. Millions of people watch this, and he's just the tip of the iceberg of these kinds of influencers who are now trying to give men their masculinity back, apparently. But it's getting a pushback. Of course, the radical feminism is there. And this, of course, is the gender war, which we're also aware. And all of this seems very much about I guess, really doing more of what's been happening steadily in Western society, particularly, which is the atomization of family,
Yes.
the atomization
Yes,
of
yes.
community,
Yeah.
getting people to be divided, creating fear, creating a kind of a demoralization, a mistrust between genders. That seems an awfully toxic set of, if you like,
Toxic blend.
Yeah. And what do you see on the ground? How do you see that rolling out in terms of the boys and the adolescent men that you deal with? I mean, we get also lots of statistics with suicide and rates amongst young men being very high. Tell us a little bit about the reality on the ground and how all this stuff is affecting kids.
Is it feeding in? Really, Andrew Tate or the like, the manosphere, and there are different degrees. There are people that are, very extreme in their perspectives in those spaces. Manosphere meaning, from man, and the O is a joining word to sphere, circle. So this is a space. It's basically a space created for men, right? And so I guess there's a critical component before I go directly to your question, though, is
Sure.
There were people who have been bringing these ideas and challenging the status quo related to modern gender takes on society, and coming back with arguments and arming men or explaining certain phenomena or giving them direction or giving them counsel. But this was before the monetization, before it hit YouTube, and there was the algorithm meant everything, when the algorithm became God, right? And so I think there was a level of maybe passion and sincerity, but now there's more of a level, there's a lot of clickbait and need for shock and need for outrage, and so this moves the algorithm, so then it's maybe bred more extremist or shocking type of language. But boots on the ground, truth be told, yes, boys for example in the UK have been struggling in terms of the educational attainment, in terms of going on to higher education. Rates I worked in HMP, you're talking about young boys getting caught up in the criminal justice system, addiction, so disproportionate numbers in a lot of social markers, measures that would show you, hey, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to know boys ain't doing too well. But for some radical feminists or some extreme left-wing ideologues, it's a zero-sum game. So if you attempt to address the boys' issues, then by default you're kind of neglecting the girls or chastising the girls. So it's created this massive chasm, and nature abhors a vacuum. So if the boys are not being addressed in school, in the mainstream, in the spaces which have the facilities and has access, and boys can access, they're not really getting a message that doesn't really resonate. They go out searching for a message that does, and sometimes it's a message that, as I said, people in the mainstream find unpalatable, uncomfortable, and difficult to digest.
Well, that's given us a really nice kind of overview to set the scene, but there's a lot to dig into why you found adolescence, for instance, unsatisfactory. We'll get back to that and maybe explore further this manosphere and this world which is addressing the male identity as it should be, and also what the politics around all this is. This is all going to be brought out. But Clive, I'm going to bring you in to the conversation. You've heard Bilal with his professional, analysis or kind of overview of young men and adolescence, and you've sort of obviously come across this drama as well. Is there more than meets the eye? Because it's very strange how say a Netflix series can suddenly become such a kind of convenient political weapon, almost, some would argue, to push certain agendas, certain lines, something which would suit the government in power, perhaps, to be able to potentially bring even more laws in, because they love bringing in more laws that restrict people's freedoms and liberties. That seems to be clear. Are situations or is material like this just really quite a convenient way of clamping down even more on men who are already under the cosh, many would argue?
Well, yes. Is there something more sinister afoot? The straight answer is yes. If you go back to the BBC series Spooks, it put out a lot of plot lines involving Muslims with backpacks. And the next thing that happens is we have 7/7, and so the narrative was already planted in people's brains. So this idea of predictive programming goes back decades. In the 1970s, there was a congressional hearing in the States, and the CIA at that point had been responsible for fabricating or publishing 1,000 books. That was way back then. They're in Hollywood, they're in Netflix, across all the platforms, social media. Everything is controlled. And the analysis that we did between 2012 and 2019 shows exactly how the world works. That basically you have a structure which is institutional hierarchy, which denies everybody free and unfettered access to the means to life. And it's all driven by money. And Bilal very accurately pointed out, it's fine to explore these things, but it's now driven by money. I would argue it was driven by money from the get-go, because I sent you an article earlier that was in Off Guardian explaining or exploring adolescence. And when you've been at this game of trying to understand the structure of the world and how events fit into that, these patterns become very obvious. So this is contrived to increase division, and we've already talked about gender division, but it also fall across other demarcation lines as well. And it's to further the agenda for surveillance and control. You also mentioned the family. There's been a long history, and this goes back centuries, of increasingly penetrating the province of the family and replacing it with state institutions. And the idea, essentially, we live on a human farm, and the ideal cattle to have are those that are docile and easily controlled. Well, the division goes a long way towards exercising control, but the emasculation of men and boys has been part of that process, because when you're trying to demolish an existing system and replace it with a world government, the last thing you want is people with any sense of identity who want to preserve their cultural identity, be it a masculine identity or whatever it may be. And I'm not suggesting that we should be aspiring to a macho world, because in essence, we are all masculine and feminine, irrespective of the sexuality. The sexuality is irrelevant to this. In our psyches and our spirit, we are masculine and feminine. We have masculine traits and feminine traits, and these should be in balance. And arguably, what we've seen in terms of the progression of feminist movement and the reduction in the appreciation of masculinity, for want of a better way of putting it, is a means of sort of dampening down. And this is now a reaction against that, but it's creating division. But at the end of the day, what we're talking about is a system which is controlled by a structure, underpinned by money. It controls all levers of power, and it's no accident whether you're talking about terrorism, COVID, mass migration, climate change, that all the narratives come out of all of these different organs, be it government, NGOs, institutions, academia, and media. They're all in harmony, and the dissenting voices are either ridiculed, not on the basis of what they're saying, but by associating them with extremism or whatever it may be, or completely ignoring them. So, whatever topic you choose to identify, there is always a much more forceful and compelling argument to substantiate the essence of what is being talked about, but it's all being distracted and diverted and distorted into forms of extremes. So anyone who is concerned about the preservation of cultural identity is immediately a racist. And there are many strands to this, and this conversation could go off in many directions. And I think it's probably not productive to do that in this instance. But suffice to say, whatever issue you're talking about, and this in particular, there is a purpose behind it, and the purpose is manifold, but surveillance and control and dismemberment of the family and greater reliance on state and corporate institutions is the name of the game.
Thank you, Clive. Bilal, some powerful stuff there.
Absolutely.
Clive, putting in real context, adding to the context you've given. But let me pick on one or two points which Clive has raised, which are immediately relevant to adolescence. Many people might say, "Oh, this is just kind of a bit of pie in the sky to blame adolescence." But it has the online Guardian article, which Clive referred to, does actually reference government funding having gone into this.
Yes. State funding, that's what we would say, right? When you say government, it sounds a little bit too polite. Let's say what it is, state.
So that's state funding. And then, of course, immediately when it got those hits with Netflix, I think something like 66 million viewers in a very short space of time, the most watched British production on Netflix.
Right.
Suddenly it was everywhere. You had reviewers sort of inviting the actors in, and you had all sorts of discussions around this issue, and the government got involved. It suddenly spiraled, and it's kind of now everywhere, and it's like being pushed on the algorithms and across mainstream media. It's interesting how that kind of narrative can be suddenly thrown into the kind of wider, if you like, vision of society. Whereas these issues haven't just popped up when adolescence, came on the scene.
Right,
of course, they've been there a lot earlier. So how come the algorithms, how come the programs that you've made, the work you've done, doesn't get that kind of traction? And suddenly when it's required, it does. That is kind of my, I think, take on what Clive is kind of really pointing the finger at in terms of like some sort of collusion or some sort of hidden agenda with all this.
Well, it does feel a little strange, and I use the word feel, not think, because it's almost like my intuition kicked in when I heard the Prime Minister speaking about adolescence, and he said, I think it's very important that we all watch this documentary. I mean, politicians use very precise in their language.
Wow.
So I didn't know if it was a Freudian slip, or was there something else at play, or what was behind that? Is it because he
it's a drama, it's fiction.
It's fiction.
Yeah.
But he said documentary, and this was before I knew there was government funding, so that got my spider senses tingling. But now I'm hearing about the government funding, I'm like, something doesn't sit quite right. Something is something, my spider senses are alive and well, and my intuition tells me that the storyline fits too neatly into the agenda. I know it's a piece of art and it's from the media, but from my perception of the world of media, at least print media, originated as a fourth estate, right? You've got the legislature, the judiciary, you've got the executive, but the fourth estate was supposed to be the press. We ask them difficult questions. We keep them in line. This is what the whole thing about judicial review, is related to, and things of that nature. So when you see the press, the print, the TV press, the print media, the world of fiction, all correlating and descending at a particular waterhole, it does leave you to think, big money, agenda, something else is going on apart from just concern and about the well-being of boys.
Sure, and on the ground, if they really wanted to do something about it, getting children to watch it in schools is probably not high on your solution list. I mean, of how young men should be addressed. And clearly, you said there are problems, and
absolutely,
it's a bit like the climate change or the climate catastrophe narratives that I hear. I hear so much about global warming and the planet warming up. I hear that everywhere. I see it everywhere. I see a huge collusion again between the state and the media, corporate or state media. And yet, when you talk about the Amazon jungle being wiped out, the Amazon forests being wiped out, or you talk about
rainforest.
Rainforest, or the pollution, for instance, caused by corporate companies, which is massive around the world. All of these other environmental issues, are relatively speaking, absolutely not on the radar. They're not promoted in that same consistent way. That's just another agenda which I kind of like I've thrown in the mix, but I don't want us to get distracted by that.
Yeah.
But is this kind of targeting of boys and adolescents helpful in your professional capacity in actually addressing their issues?
My professional opinion, my personal opinion is that the issue with young men in modern society, across the board, across ethnic grounds, across religious grounds, across cultural grounds, is the lack of masculine initiation, rites of passage, ritual process, where in pre-industrial times, different societies around the world, boys went through a particular process. They were equipped with skills, particular skills, values, and tested to arrive at a position where I'm now ready for manhood. Older men, wise men, elders called and initiate boys into manhood. That process doesn't exist in the post-industrial world. And as we've changed from agrarian societies and we've gone more technological, and then less need for manpower, and there's more need for soft skills and to be, the educational system is, advancing a particular framework. Those jobs, those industries that young men would have filled and had a sense of self and a sense of purpose, a lot of those industries don't exist anymore. So it's not so much that there's a problem with young men as much as they're just ill-equipped. So it's systemic. We're not equipping them. We're setting them up to fail. That's my perspective, that the outcomes with the violence, with the antisocial behavior, with the imprisonment, with the addiction, with the suicide rates, it's avoidable. We can give them the skills at a young age for them to be have self-awareness and have emotional regulation. These are skills that you can learn, and you're supposed to learn as a young person to bring into your manhood and to arm you in the world.
How have we got to this stage, do you think, in terms of where young men are now? Has there been the hand of government? Has there been a failure amongst parents? Is it just something that's emerged in this social media environment? What are the main factors that have actually caused, if you like, young men to be suicidal? More so than women? Why are they also underachieving in schools, relatively speaking? These are statistics that I've definitely come across. What are some of the underlying reasons for that?
I think that the young men are ill-equipped, and the institutions and the processes that equip them don't exist, or they've been phased out. On top of that, there is a message when you have a hashtag "men are trash." Boys see that, right? And when you have the attitude, when you have programs like The View, where a mainstream presenter will come out and say, men are useless. Actually, let me qualify that. Gay men are okay. My gay friends are, but men in general are good for nothing. And and everybody's laughing. That's just two examples of the kind of environment we're living in. Boys hear that. They know something's not right. They know there's double standards. And so, as I said, they go looking for answers, sometime in the wrong place.
Would the same happen if women were, or are women being, if you like, treated in that same way? That laughing, that humor, that kind of.
I don't think that would be. Not only do I don't think it'd be acceptable to my taste, but nowhere would that be acceptable.
But is it
as a part of the mainstream?
Is it happening specifically for men, or are women also victims of this kind of?
Yeah, women are victims. One, because women can be victims of violent men who haven't been equipped to deal with rejection or to deal with life issues. So sometimes there is issues with, interaction between men and women, girls and boys, where women come off second best. But also even on another level where, there's all these statistics coming out where so many young women are going into higher education and becoming professional and becoming economically viable. And there's a shortage of potential suitors, men on their level, for want of a better term. And so it creates an imbalance. So the men at the top, the elite guys, the guys that go to school or that have their own business, or they're doing well for themselves, they are spoilt for choice. And so, as I heard one men's work advocate say, it doesn't really encourage good behavior even amongst the elites.
Yeah. So, I mean, what comes to mind now is of course, the overspill of this attitude towards men, or vice versa, the impact on relationships, because there are all sorts of other really very disturbing statistics that I find about marriage, the reduction of the number of people who want to get married or be in relationships which produce children. Places like Japan, of course, are in a deficit. They're kind of in a negative sort of zone in terms of replacing the population, and they're having real issues. This isn't just Japan. There are many other nations in the same boat, and it's heading that way. So it also strikes me that there might be much bigger issues that are coming because of the insecurity of men or boys and the inability to earn in a way that they used to be able to earn, to keep a family, to have a wife.
A sense of purpose, a sense of belonging as well.
Do you think that's something really, actually happening on the ground? Is that part of the impact of this kind of attack on adolescence to some extent? Is it connected?
There is interconnection. As human beings, we do thrive and we do better when we have a sense of belonging and when we feel connected. Couple that, as I said, with the skills, the communication skills that, for example, girls have naturally, the way that girls are socialized, hierarchies in friendship groups, learning how to express emotional intelligence. These things just develop in girls. So, it's a way that girls have been brought up, and gender roles and etc. that give girls these skills. But human beings can develop those skills, but in general, so boys too have that potential. But if they're problematized from a young age, if their masculinity and their energetic self is problematized or, almost pathologized, then it doesn't leave space for them to develop. Or we're not starting from a position of saying that these young men in this society, they're amazing, they have this great potential, they are the movers and shakers of tomorrow, they're the big thinkers, and we want to work with them in some way to give them structure and give them order that will tap into that. They might listen a little. But if you're starting from a place of boys are problematic and we don't want them to hurt girls, so we want to have, let's show adolescent. Come on. I wouldn't want to listen to that. I would switch off. I've been in an assembly before where this is about 3 years ago when Andrew Tate was really hot. I don't think he's that viral anymore with the kids. Like,
no,
the mainstream's just catching up. He's old news. There's other guys on the scene. But when he was really hot, I worked in a school where they had an assembly, and a teacher with the best will in the world, male teacher, went in front of the school to explain why some of these these are harmful ideas and these are some sexist ideas. But what he ended up doing is wagging his finger at them. I watched the body language of them just mentally implode or withdraw, and they weren't listening to him.
Yeah.
They weren't listening to him.
He was lecturing.
And but later on that afternoon, conversations in the playground, in the public space. Yeah, because what he said 80% of women and 20%. They were still quoting Tate, and still all the talking points were still alive and well. It has no impact. That assembly, naughty, toxic boy, had it didn't hit the spot.
Interesting. Clive, you've a lot of things Bilal's touched on about the reality of boys, adolescence, of the relationships issues. Did you have any thoughts on some of the things that he raised? I'm sure that you were taking some notes, and any reactions?
We could go on for hours, and I know we don't have hours. I think the question of art is quite interesting, because arguably in the 60s and 70s, art was very much a place of criticism of authority. And effectively what has happened over the last few decades is that corporate culture and government have commandeered art. It may be a perverse thing to say, but 9/11 could be regarded as one of the biggest artworks of the millennium, because it's the visual and visceral impact of these things that has such an effect. There is also a topical thread to why now. Why has this been released now, other than the fact that it's ready to be released? Let's not forget we're in the middle of a war between NATO, a proxy war between NATO and Russia in Ukraine. You've got Israel committing genocide, and many governments cheerleading them in effect. even though the people are much more concerned about what really matters, which is the lives that are being lost. So, to suddenly put this in the mainstream as a talking point has a strong smell of being a distraction. And in terms of the whole sexuality of boys and girls, I would argue that we come from a place where if you take the turn of the 20th century, where effectively men worked and women didn't, the system saw a great deficit in terms of there was always people that they could get into work and harvest their energy and resources. And although Bilal mentioned, girls in senior positions in fairly intellectual professions, they were leaving motherhood till much later because it would damage their career prospects. So in effect, this is not a demonstration of their femininity. It's a demonstration of their fitting into the masculine world, rather perversely in the context of what we're talking about. And so there are many of confusions that have arisen over recent decades, quite deliberately, I would argue, where children have become increasingly confused. I mean, I was an adolescent more than 50 years ago, but I do remember the state of confusion in adolescence. Well, if I was confused then, I'd be as confused as anything by now. I don't think, it's no wonder that so many kids are lost, for want of it. They have no foundation. They've lost role models. They've lost foundations of what they believe. The best thing that children can have is love and freedom. And where they're getting that is good. But because of these problems have become generational, whole families have been blighted by this progression towards atomization of the family and the elimination of individuality, in effect. The education system was never designed as a real education system. It was designed as a system of control. And when we talk about population, the agenda is to reduce the population. So one way of reducing the population is to reduce reproduction. And they've done that progressively through the Planned Parenthood Association, through education, media, the promotion of alternative sexual lifestyles, and not last but by no means least, the extent of pornography and the distortion of sexual union between a man and a woman that has taken place in everybody's psyche. And that is not a homophobic statement. I think, one needs to be tolerant, but we should not be promoting alternative lifestyles just because teenagers are confused, because they're confused not about their sexuality, they're confused about their identity, what their role in life is, and everything else. And maybe, swinging onto the LGBTQ agenda gives them some sense of purpose and identity, but that's no substitute for the real thing in the real world, where family and procreation are the foundation of our species. And once we lose that ability, then it's night Vienna.
Well, Donald Trump has fated Andrew Tate.
Mm-hmm.
He himself has been attacked by radical feminists, etc., as being a misogynist, as being kind of basically guilty of all sorts of crimes against women. He had court cases, etc.
Yeah.
So here are two figures, to drop Andrew Tate now, but going on to Donald Trump, who's actually now in America supporting, of course, what supposed traditional family values, the society, etc. And that excites a large number of people within that nation. And it also creates a huge divide, a genuine divide between wokeism, the wokeist movement, and what Trump's saying. This is another recipe for clearing battle lines
Fault lines, yeah?
Yeah, fault lines.
Yeah.
So that seems to me also potentially an engineering exercise, because the West generally now in decline, it seems, economically, and at war with each other in terms of tariffs being thrown around, Donald Trump throwing his weight around, breaking up all of the old order, making Europe insecure, making friends with Putin, etc., who himself is a very traditionalist, quite Christian orientated fellow. So you've got these kind of macho figures like Putin who are being promoted, Donald Trump on his side, as well at a state political level. And on the other hand, you've got people like Keir Starmer, who's kind of wokeism personified as well. Yeah. So there's a collision within Western society that's being played out in the politics, but it's also coming from those fault lines around young boys, around men.
Culture wars, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you see that all panning out? Where does your crystal ball take us? If this continues as it is, where does that leave Western society in particular?
Yeah, I can't see things going back to the old order. Like, things don't go back, but things do trend. And right-wing values are gonna have been emerging. I don't mean far right, because that has been disturbingly emerging or on the rise. But I'm talking just traditional right-wing family values and like a level of clarity. I think for some, the wokeism and the pronouns and just the new age things that some people just struggle with. They just really struggle. They're not bigoted. They don't want to hurt anybody. They don't wish anybody ill will, but they're just like, this is too much. And it's as if certain traditional right-wing values give a level of clarity, and I think that might be related to why Donald Trump came into power, and there's a lot of anger from the left in America towards those who voted for Trump. There's a lot of anger.
So solutions. I mean, the last 5 or 6 minutes. I mean, I'll start with you, and Clive will have his as well, perhaps to look at. There were issues around education, the education institutions, etc. If I take Clive's narrative, he mistrusts with quite a lot of evidence actually about institutions, hierarchy, and its kind of potentially sinister and nefarious agenda of control. There, if the motive of power is not the betterment of society, not the nurturing of a healthy, balanced man with both feminine and masculine traits, the Jamal and the Jalal, as they say in Islam,
the power and the beauty,
the power and the beauty. There is a balance there. Then what do you see as kind of answers for what actually ought to be done? If government is wrong, if the state is wrong, if they're kowtowing to corporate needs, and that's what it is. The education system is producing young people that serve the needs of corporates. The corporates are going to be AI and robot engineering and that kind of line. They're not interested necessarily in what's going to happen to the state of men necessarly. How does that need to change?
Whoa, this is another show, but I'm going to keep it very brief. I think, as I said, there have been some ideas created with feminism and the language and the ideology that has empowered girls, and I think that's a great thing. Women have emerged in the Western world into public life and higher education. These are great things, right? Put great minds in good positions. But I feel that we have underdeveloped or under-resourced boys. I think we need to give boys rites of passage, give them ritual process, help them to emerge with skills that matter in the new world, emotional skills, self-regulatory skills. But also, let's go back to education to better your mind. Like, let's teach boys things like Stoic philosophy, right? And critical thinking, right? Argumentation. Let's teach them things of this nature so they can articulate their point of view and maybe be more well-equipped in a new world.
Thank you, Bilal. And Clive, your conclusive remarks. How do you see things improving, and particularly in relation to young boys and adolescents?
Well, one of the distractions that I didn't allude to is the ongoing economic collapse, which now appears to be accelerating. I mean, our prognosis has been that this structure under which we live of money, institutional hierarchy, and misallocation of the commons is coming to an end. And I feel very optimistic. And I think the solution for people is, one, to understand that the way we've lived for the last 2,500 years is not natural to us. it is positively harmful to us. But we now have the tools to live as we used to live in small communities, but we can operate on a much larger scale as a communal family. So it comes down specifically to boys and girls, I would say, because I think, for differing reasons, they both face challenges that are unprecedented. I think the answer lies in what is the nucleus of the human family. It is the family itself. But I would argue it's not just blood family. It's anyone within your circle who you regard as family. And I've been working on the ground with many and various groups in many different areas: health, food, law, and there is a sense of family amongst these people that is growing and resonating. And it goes along with the sort of spiritual, energetic rising, which is evident all around us. And the chaos and the confusion and the death and destruction that we are in the midst of at the moment is an essential transition, because for this new system to emerge, then there must be death and destruction. So we're actually heading to a very different place where boys, girls, men, women will feel much more comfortable within themselves, because they will revert to operating as we have for millennia, long before we used money. The difficulty was that we couldn't scale activities or transactions because the technology wasn't available when money was adopted some 3,000 years ago. But we now have the technology to actually handle value directly, to understand in very granular terms everybody's needs, capacities, skills, wisdom, relationships, transactions, etc., as we need to. So within a family, nobody asks for money after a meal or issues a bill. We don't use money within family other than when it requires going outside for resources. We've developed this psychology that if I do something, I must be paid for it. Well, that's not how we operated for most of our existence, and that's what we're returning to. So I see a great future for my children, and more specifically my grandchildren, because I think we're right in the sort of the eye of the storm of this paradigm shift, and things will get better. But we need to recognise that it's no use demanding these things from government. It is down to us. We have to create the structures and the organisation. We have to self-organise, recognising that the overriding imperative is to live by love, effectively look after thy neighbour as you would yourself. And when that happens, because we have the tools to make it happen, then the geopolitical games and their media manipulation won't actually mean very much.
Thank you, Clive. And I've just got one question that has been lurking in the nether regions of my mind throughout this. Finally, your direct advice, Bilal, to any young adolescents watching this program who've been assaulted by these kinds of negative images about, especially young boys, young men.
Yeah.
What would be your advice to them?
I would say to them to remember that you matter, that you're important just because you are you, that there is help available if you're struggling. Speak to somebody, tap into an elder, a relative, a family member that you trust, and it will get better. Things will get better. But I believe in you and I love you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Clive Menzies, and thank you, Bilal Ali, for a fascinating journey into the world of adolescence. And of course, it is something that is vital. Human civilization ultimately relies on sound young people, a base of youngsters who are balanced in every way, shape or form. Human mind, body, soul, it all needs to be balanced. I'm not sure that in Western society and with Western governments, and particularly through the influence of big business, profit-making corporations, that we've got that balance right. And I think it does seem increasingly like we need to investigate more thoroughly what that balance should be, and what it actually is. Clive's hinted at spirituality. I certainly think, and Bilal has hinted at teaching empathy. There are vast, if you like, holes or vacuums we've left in the kind of training and teaching that we give young people, both at home and at school and beyond, which need addressing very, very seriously. And I think that it's not a bad thing also necessarily to look back at the past, as Clive was hinting as well, because there have been awfully well-balanced societies in the past who weren't based on hyper-materialism, who weren't based on the competitiveness that we have now, the hyper-competitiveness, I'd say, the hyper-materialism, I'd say. All of this is quite toxic, actually. And children growing up in a society looking at the models around them, of parents and families and companies and education, which all drives them towards this kind of hyper-materialistic imperative, and ones especially that take out perhaps the God factor within the lives of all ordinary individuals, is leaving a huge, God-sized hole. You're not replacing it with materialism necessarily. That is also, I think, for young people, a massive problem, because if you take away real meaning on the bigger level about what life really is all about, and you don't offer them adequate alternatives to the spiritual divine models, then you've left them really swimming around in confusion. Lot to think about. You'll have your own thoughts. Please make sure you comment, give us your opinions and your thoughts, even your solutions around how young people should be nurtured, developed. Do leave us a like, do subscribe to the channel, and share widely so that we can get our message across even further. Thank you for watching Deep Dive Perspective.